The Himalayas have been hit by a catastrophe of terrifying proportions. A sudden torrent of water, mud, and debris tore through parts of Nepal near the Tibet border, swallowing roads, bridges, homes, and critical infrastructure. And now, as Nepal races against time to find survivors, India is moving in with a major air relief operation. The Indian Air Force has already sent a C-130J Super Hercules loaded with essential relief material, and more aircraft are being lined up. A C-17 Globemaster and an additional C-130 aircraft are being prepared to carry more supplies, while helicopters are being kept ready for rescue and evacuation missions. This is not a combat deployment, but these aircraft are being sent into an environment where every hour could mean the difference between finding someone alive or finding nothing. So what exactly is India sending? And why are the C-130J and C-17 so important to Nepal's desperate rescue effort? The first aircraft in this emergency response is the C-130J Super Hercules. The aircraft has already carried around 10 tons of humanitarian assistance and medical supplies to Kathmandu. That cargo includes temporary shelters, blankets, hygiene kits, medicines, and solar lamps. Think about what that means on the ground. When roads disappear, bridges collapse, and entire settlements are cut off, moving relief by truck becomes almost impossible. That is where a military transport aircraft becomes crucial. The C-130J is designed to move people and cargo rapidly into difficult environments. And in a disaster zone like Nepal's Himalayan terrain, speed and flexibility can be just as important as the amount of cargo being delivered. The aircraft is therefore not simply carrying boxes. It is carrying the first layer of an emergency response. But India is not stopping there. The next major player is the C-17 Globemaster 3. This is the heavy lift giant of the Indian Air Force. Where the C-130J provides flexibility and rapid tactical transport, the C-17 brings enormous strategic airlift capability. That makes it ideal for moving large quantities of relief equipment, supplies, and potentially heavy disaster response machinery over long distances. And that matters because Nepal's disaster is not just a humanitarian crisis. It is also an infrastructure crisis. Roads have been ripped apart, bridges have been destroyed, power infrastructure has been damaged, hydropower projects have been hit, and in mountainous terrain, repairing one destroyed road can take far longer than simply delivering emergency supplies by air. So India's airlift capability effectively creates a temporary lifeline over the destruction. Then comes the additional C-130 aircraft. This is important because disaster relief is rarely a one-flight operation. Supplies have to keep moving. Medical material has to keep arriving. Equipment has to be replenished. And if rescue teams are deployed, they also need transportation and logistical support. The combination of the C-130J, additional C-130 aircraft, and the much larger C-17 gives India something extremely valuable: multiple layers of airlift capacity. One aircraft can move quickly, another can carry heavier loads, and additional aircraft can keep the pipeline running. That is the real significance of India's response. It is not about one dramatic flight. It is about creating an aerial bridge into a disaster zone where the ground network has been badly damaged. And the urgency could hardly be greater. The latest reports say Nepal's death toll has climbed dramatically, with hundreds still missing. The Nepal Tourism Board had initially identified 384 travelers whose whereabouts were unconfirmed, including 105 Indian nationals and 37 NRIs. Those figures were preliminary and were being verified as authorities tried to establish who had survived, who had escaped, and who remained trapped or unreachable. Since then, reports have indicated that the number of missing people across the wider disaster zone has risen substantially. For rescuers, this creates an enormous problem. The flood has not simply left people stranded. It has destroyed the very infrastructure that rescuers normally depend upon to reach them. And that is why the aircraft are only one part of India's response. Helicopters are also being kept ready for rescue and evacuation operations. Because while a C-17 can move huge quantities of equipment, it cannot simply land beside every isolated village. Helicopters can. They can reach areas where roads have vanished. They can evacuate injured people. They can deliver emergency supplies into cut-off locations. And they can help disaster response teams assess areas that remain inaccessible from the ground. The NDRF has also been placed on standby for a possible relief and rescue mission. So the Indian response is gradually becoming a complete disaster relief package. Heavy airlift, tactical airlift, helicopters, medical assistance, and specialized rescue manpower. And this is where the images of these giant aircraft become significant. The C-17, the C-130J, the additional C-130. They may look like enormous military machines, but right now their most important mission is not warfare. it is survival. India has already flown humanitarian supplies into Kathmandu while additional airlift is being prepared. And with Nepal facing an unprecedented rescue challenge across mountainous terrain, the ability to move aid through the sky could become one of the most important tools available to rescuers. The Himalayan disaster has destroyed roads. It has isolated communities. It has left families desperately searching for missing relatives. But the response is now gathering momentum, and India's message is unmistakable. When the roads are gone, the skies become the lifeline. The rescue operation is still unfolding. The numbers are changing. The scale of the destruction is still being assessed. But one thing is clear, Nepal's disaster is no longer simply a local emergency. It has become a massive humanitarian challenge across the Himalayan region. And India's C-130J, C-17 and additional C-130 airlift are now being positioned at the center of that relief effort.
Now, one of the doctor. Oh.
Imagine standing in a Himalayan valley when suddenly the mountain itself begins to move. Not just water, ice, rock, mud, trees, and tons upon tons of earth rushing downhill like a tsunami. That is what happened in Nepal. On August 26, a catastrophic flood tore through the Koshi River Valley near the Nepal-China border, devastating communities and sending destruction more than 170 kilometers downstream. But here is what makes this disaster so terrifying. There was almost no warning, and at first authorities thought Nepal had been hit by an earthquake. But the real story was even more extraordinary. It began high in the Himalayas. At around 8:37 in the morning, seismic instruments detected a powerful signal. It looked like an earthquake, but according to the US Geological Survey, there was no conventional earthquake causing this disaster. The signal came from something moving across the mountain, a massive collapse of ice and rock. Imagine a huge section of a glacier suddenly breaking apart. That collapsing ice slammed into the mountainside, dragging rock and soil with it. And then gravity took over. The debris accelerated downhill. As it entered the river system, it began gathering more and more material. Water, mud, boulders, trees, and shattered earth. What started high on the mountain became a gigantic moving wall of destruction. By the time it reached the valley below, witnesses were seeing something that looked less like a normal flood and more like a tsunami made of dirt. Early estimates suggested the debris wave may have reached around 30 meters high, and it didn't stop. It raced down the Koshi River Valley, swallowing roads, bridges, buildings, and everything else in its path.